Hello, dear chess friends. I'm International Master Andrey Ostrovskiy. You're welcome to the third lesson of the series dedicated to the importance of the center in chess. In this one, we'll talk about the mobility and the flexibility of the centralized pieces. This position is taken from the game between Mikhail Tal and Vasily Smyslov. And White started at first glance very dangerous and annoying attack. So White played f4 and after knight e4 even f5, and we will see that Black's position looks very dangerous at the moment because White already has great pawns e5 f5 very close to Black's king. So White is about to play f6 and this looks devastating. For example, if bishop goes to c5 with check here, then after king h1, Black can't play, for example, knight f2, because rook takes f2, bishop takes f2, now f6, creating already a threat of a checkmate. The only defense is g6, and now queen goes to f4, simply attacking the bishop and intending to get to h6 with the inevitable checkmate on g7. This shows that White's threats are quite great after f5. So the only normal defense for Black to prevent f6 is of course to play king to h8. King goes away from the g file, and now f6 is not a big deal in many cases because Black at least has a chance just to take this pawn. So White played rook to f3, which looks very natural follow-up after playing f4, f5. So now White has the queen, the rook, two pawns, and even bishop c1 in the attack. So this bishop attacks from the initial position because sooner or later when White plays f6, for example, and pawn g7 goes away, this bishop has an access to h6 square, which might be very dangerous and very efficient for White. So here Black, instead of making everything to protect his position on the king side, played bishop to c5. Check, natural move, but at the same time looks not very logical because bishop goes away from the king side, and at first glance looks like Black has to have a lot of pieces, as many as possible, exactly on the king side to protect the king. However, Black's plan is a bit different, and we will see why. King goes to f1. Strange decision, but appears that White already has some problems with the center. So obviously king to h1 is not a great idea because of knight f2. White is forced to take the knight, and after bishop takes f2, if compared to the variation that we already saw, f6 is no longer a case because Black has g takes f6. This opens the g file. We can see bishop b7 is very active, attacking g2. So opening of the g file will give Black additional counter-attacking idea based on rook g8 and then joining the attack against g2. So this looks quite promising for Black, not for White. But why not to play bishop to e3? The move which looks very natural, just to protect the king, to try to complete the development and to get rid of this active bishop c5. In this case, Black continues with the queen e7. And as we can see, there is a problem with the pawn e5. So after White played f4, f5, e5 became vulnerable. So yeah, it is a very dangerous and active pawn, but in fact we can see it as also a weakness. And White simply has no suitable defense here because f6 leads to very nice tactics. At first glance it looks like a devastating move, but in fact Black has knight takes f6, using the fact that bishop on e3 is vulnerable. So if pawn takes f6, then bishop e3 check, king goes away, and g takes f6, exactly with the idea of rook g8, rook on f3 is hanging, and Black gets to g2 in a few moves. So after queen e7, it's necessary to protect e5 pawn somehow. Let's say queen goes to f4, in which case Black simply continues attacking this pawn with the help of rook to e8. And White already has no suitable defense. Black simply captures e5, after which White's attack is no longer dangerous, because without this pawn it's not possible to play f6. Queen from e5 will not only attack White's position, so centralized queen is very powerful, we already understood that, but at the same time protect g7. and it is the first moment to understand the flexibility of the central position. So the queen on e5 won't be only the attacking piece, it will also have access to squares that are needed to be protected. So from e5 it will control g7, maybe the most vulnerable and the most tempting target for white's pieces. So king goes to f1. White wants to continue the attack, and at the same time white doesn't want to have problems with the e5 pawn. And now black plays d6. Again, ignoring at the moment white's threats on the king side, but doing everything to change the situation in the center. So what is black's idea? We can see it as an undermining move. Black wants to get rid of this extremely nasty e5 pawn, to open up a position in the center, and to have an access to central squares with his pieces. And we will see how efficient this method is. f6, white just continues the attack. Of course, now black has no real choice. g6 is forced, and queen goes to h4. So now we can see white's plan is very clear and very dangerous. So white wants to put the queen on h6, creating a sort of a queen g7 checkmate. This will force the rook to g8, after which it will be possible to attack along the h file. For example, there is an idea of taking on h7 and then rook goes to h3 with the checkmate. At the same time, white has this rook h3 almost at any moment, and this looks just devastating. But black predicted all these situations and all these attacking possibilities and planned something really special. You will like it. D takes e5 first of all. So black captures this very important pawn. This pawn supported another great pawn, f6. So after this capture, f6 becomes less protected, and it is very important because in many lines, when white goes away with the queen from h4 and rook, for example, joins the attack with the help of rook h3, f6 becomes not protected. So great centralized knight e4 will have a chance to take this pawn and prevent everything. So that is another point, another description of the flexibility of centralized pieces. So knight on e4 is a centralized knight. It is very active. It attacks many different squares in white's camp, but at the same time it controls most important squares in black's camp. So especially f6, right? So at any moment this knight can just take this pawn and make white's attack less efficient. But at the moment black's main threat is different. So after d takes e5, we can see d file is open. Black is ready to play queen d1 with the checkmate in case white's queen doesn't control e1. So one of a sudden, white's king appears under black's attack, and looks like it is even less protected than black's one. So very nice change in the situation. So it looks like black comes up with a very serious counterplay now. It's not possible to protect d1 normally, because if, let's say, rook goes to d3, just like we discussed, this leaves f6 pawn not protected, and black simply captures on f6 with 2 extra pawns and simply winning position. By the way, it is a check, and this forces the exchange of the queen. h4 and queen h4 was the most dangerous attacking piece in white's position, so white simply has no chances after that. So after d takes e5, white's normal defense is king to e2. Well, it looks a bit strange, but it is the only way for white to proceed. And now the point of the whole operation. Queen goes to d4. And now we can see what happened. So instead of passively protecting the king, black decided to change the situation in the center. That helped black to centralize all the pieces. Well, not all the pieces, but all important pieces. And these 3 pieces, the bishop, the queen, and the knight, start creating very, very dangerous threats to opponent's king. And again, there is a great flexibility because these pieces, well centralized ones, combine attacking functions and defending functions, and that's the point of this flexibility of the centralized pieces. So there is an access not only to central squares, to some squares in opponent's camp, but also a great access to squares in on camp, so these pieces are ready to attack and ready to protect the king if necessary. So the knight is here just to control f6, which means black has a great position here. So a few lines to demonstrate the power of black's centralized pieces. So first of all, there is a threat of knight c3 check, and then queen takes queen. So white has to do something with that. The most logical continuation for white is, of course, to play queen to h6, creating a concrete threat of a checkmate on g7. But now black is just in time to come up with the counterattack. So knight goes to g3 check, tempo move, and we can see what happens. So bishop attacks the rook. If black manages to get rid of this rook, the queen will have an access to f2 square, and this is just the start of a brilliant attack. So let's say rook takes g3, then queen goes to f2 check, king goes to d1, rook goes to d8 check, rook goes to d3, then just queen f1, rook takes d3, takes, queen takes g2. So every move is a tempo move. White has no chances to do something active, so white is forced to protect his king, and black is just forced to checkmate it. Bishop goes to f3 with the checkmate. If pawn takes on g3, then bishop takes f3. Let's say king takes, queen goes to d1 check, king goes to e4, queen e2 check, forcing the king to the center. Now rook goes to d8, joining the attack. Of course, black sacrifices a lot of material, but pay attention. White's material is not efficient because it is not developed yet, and, well, just makes no difference. King takes c5, queen f2 check, bishop goes to e3. Looks like, well, white is already fine, so manages to protect the king, but now queen eliminates the only dangerous pawn in white's position, prevents the only threat of white here, the threat of a checkmate on g7, and now this queen is about to checkmate the king. King goes to b4, a5, king b5, queen a6, queen c6, and finally a checkmate on b4. So, as you can see, a great power of black's centralized pieces. After queen d4, black simply creates decisive threats. And we can see the point here, right? There is a golden rule in chess. So, whenever you are attacked on the side, one of the best methods to react on that is a breakthrough in the center. And now you understand why. Because centralized pieces are extremely active, extremely flexible. They combine attacking and defensive functions. So there is also another rule. So never start an attack on the side when you don't control the situation in the center good enough to prevent opponent's activity there. So here, white started an attack on the side and simply underestimated black's counterplay in the center. And that is the result. So in the game, Tal decided to play rook to h3, just going away from these covered attacks and protecting the queen, now creating a threat of a queen h7 checkmate, but black found a good way to neutralize all the threats with the help of queen f2. The simplest way of decreasing white's attacking potential and converting an advantage, because now the exchange of queens is forced, after which knight comes back to the center just to attack f6, and after bishop h6, black decided just to capture the pawn on f6, and after bishop f8, rook f8, well, white has an extra exchange, but this extra exchange is compensated by black's pair of pawns. So these pawns are very dangerous potentially because they will start moving sooner or later, and there will be a chance just to promote one of them to a queen. Black has a pair of extremely active bishops here. As you can see, g2 is vulnerable, and white's pieces are just not coordinated, so white has no chances to survive it, and Smyslov just managed gradually to win this game, to convert this great advantage. So once again, let's have a look how it has started to understand most important things. So first, f4, the move that allowed the knight to the center, but the knight alone can't make any impact on the situation. After f5, it looked like position is already very dangerous for black, but black made everything to increase the pressure in the center, so black centralized first minor pieces, then came up with this breakthrough in the center, and finally the point was here when the queen joined this centralization, after which white was already hopeless. Thanks for your attention. See you next lessons.